Greetings, everyone. Hi there. I'm Clifford Bates. Again, welcome to our next session of reading Machiavelli's Prince. Um, um, we are now ending. Today, we're reading chapter 19, which brings us to the end of the section that deals with virtue, the questions of the virtues of the prince. Today, chapter 19 is the longest chapter of the Prince with 21 paragraphs. So, okay, the bug is stuck at the bugs. You don't see them; they're the one too. It's driving me crazy. But the Prince is a short book like this. It's certain structures. It reflects, as Machiavelli says, this is all his learning. He's giving it. It's a gift of all his learning. And today we're dealing with the ending of a theme, and also some scholars argue the virtue part goes longer, but the problem is the next section deals with what we call what some will argue is a question of prudence, the prudence of the prince, in that sense, the prudence of the prince. The prince's conception of judgment, and it focuses on judgment. And I agree with my old professor, De Alvarez, who argues that that the nature of the last section is kind of like we're constantly being quizzed by Machiavelli to see if we have prudence, um, and whether we are worthy of this. Um, but then again, some might argue that it happens all the time. I was watching a little thing by Quentin Skinner yesterday from his Google talk. He's talking about Google back in 2010. This is the big thing. Skinner is one of the founding fathers of the Cambridge School. I was trained. De Alvarez was a student of. Well, De Alvarez got his doctorate at Notre Dame, influenced both by the Vogelinians and a little bit, and by Strauss. In fact, he turned more to Strauss in that sense. And Strauss and his Machiavelli and Skinner's Machiavelli are completely opposite. Even though at the end, in the last 20 years, Skinner's Machiavelli became more and more closer, like his understanding that Machiavelli is kind of mimicking or mocking Cicero is very much kind of in agreeing with what Strauss argues is that there's a break of ancient morality and modern morality, modern political thought, ancient political thought, and Machiavelli is that moment of break. And that Machiavelli basically is the beginning point of modern political thought in that sense, where Skinner used to suggest that Machiavelli was kind of like the renaissance of classical political thinking. He's kind of altered some of that teaching, saying that more. But again, the point about why we're speaking this is that this is this debate between, let's say, the Strauss, who argues for kind of looking at the text, looking at the argument, close looking at the argument, where Skinner's approach is more historical and tends to look at the context and trying to always contextualize this to the environment. Now, these approaches are not as different as they are ultimately, in the sense of taking context to being important. The problem is that Skinnerian approach overemphasizes and dismisses the ability of transcendence, or it used to. Now I think Skinner's recent stuff, ever since he turned to art, seems to kind of taken a better interest in transcendence. Strauss always argued for a transcendence in this sense. Now, why is that important for this moment? Maybe I should have talked about this earlier with people. No, but this is the moment. This chapter is a very Kishu one, because not only does it end virtue, and it's the longest one, right? It deals with the question of avoiding contempt. It's kind of application as well of what he's done so far, right? About the question of virtue, where he, at least the things that princes can be praised or blamed for, which he then talks about the need for the effectual truth versus the ineffectual truth. He talked about the he went through the various chapters dealing with first liberality and parsimony. Now, next he did it was the next chapter after liberality, parsimony, cruelty, pity, then faith and and honesty. Right now we're looking at avoiding contempt and hatred, which he always argued that that contempting and hatred is something that he's constantly brought up, even previous chapters. So now he's going to give us the longest account here about how to do this. Now let's go to it. It's again 21 chapters long, not 20 chapters, 26 paragraphs long. Let us begin the first paragraph. But because I have spoken of the most important qualities mentioned above, I wish to discuss the other briefly under these generalities. That a prince should think, as has been said above, of avoiding those things which makes him hated and contemptible. And when he avoids this, he will have done his part, and he will find no danger in the other vices. Now, this sentence is the whole point. In other words, remember he had that. Again, I'll give you my little notes in there. That's right. Remember this 11 pairs of qualities. Liberality, misero, which again is kind of stinginess, not because Vero is rapine and he doesn't want to say that, right? Second, giver, rapacious, cruel, full of pity, faithless, faithful, effeminate, pusillanimous, the fifth, verses fierce and spirited. Then sixth is human, and the other next is proud. Sixth, seventh, lascivious, chaste. 8, open and cunning. 9, hard and easy. 10, grave and light. And 11, religious and skeptical. Right. This is from chapter. This is from chapter 15, which dealt with the question of things that princes most to be praised or blamed for. So of those things, he dealt with what? We dealt with in chapter 16, we dealt with liberality and parsimony, stingy, the first of the things, right? Liberality and then stinginess, right? Then we dealt with pity and cruelty, right? That's the third. And some people argue the first and the second, the giver and rapacious, are also dealt with in the previous one, because in many ways, giver and rapaciousness are repeating what liberal and miserable deals with, right? Then he dealt with the question of faithless and faithful in the previous chapter. So now we're turning on to the question of all the rest, the feminine, pusillanimous, fixer, fierce and spirited, human and proud, lascivious, and chaste, open, cunning, hard, easy, grave, light, religious and skeptical. Now, some people would argue religious and skeptical is also dealt in the last chapter also. So let's say the last was the last and the fourth were kind of addressed. Now this is the remaining things. The only thing that he has to worry about, he says, is what? Well, of the quality, what will make you discuss briefly in this general guideline is what? Those things that make you hateful and contemptible. Avoid them. of those qualities, and if any of those qualities make you hated or contemptible in the eyes of your subjects and others, avoid them. Avoid them. And he will have done his part and will find no danger in the other vices. So of the bad things, only those things that bring you contempt and hate. Not even the bad vices. They'll use also you have to be careful. Sometimes a virtue, which seems all virtue, comes. We return from the interruption. Sorry about that. As I said, we basically looked at the themes of all the virtues that you have to avoid the ones that are dangerous to you, right? So then let's continue. He says, what makes him hated, this next sentence after the first, right? First paragraph. What makes him hated above all, as I said, is rapaciousness and the usurpation of the goods and women of his subjects. Again, we talked about this, avoid touching the good women. We went over this again in the previous video, and therefore go review it again. But it's like this, again, it's about the goods and women. It's not about women are material goods. In fact, it's about the women is about the honor of the man. Because the question of the type of women is not your mother and your sister, and even that is important. That is these things again are attached to your honor, and therefore, once upon touching them, is attempt to touch you, and therefore this is why it's a disrespect or a attack on the person in that sense. So therefore, the goods and the women of the subjects. Don't do that. That makes you rapaciousness. Next sentence, he should abstain from these. For the universality, of men live contented when neither their goods nor their honor are taken. He spells it out here. Neither their goods nor their honor are taken, and one then has only to combat the ambitions of the few, who may be restrained in many modes and with ease. In other words, as long as you don't take from the people and you don't hurt and despise the subjects, again, you're gracious and usurpation of the goods of your subjects. That is, therefore, abstain from their goods and their honor. What happens then? Once you deal with that, the only thing you have to combat is the ambitions of the few. Remember, the few want to do what? Be great, and that requires them to compel the many. The many only want to be left alone. Okay, that's the the few and the many. The few always want to achieve things. They're ambitious. They want the things. The great, and usually this forces them to take and compel the many to do things. The many just want to be left alone. That's why he says the many's claim is more honest, and therefore maybe more just. So he says, therefore we need to combat the ambitions of the few, who may be restrained by many modes and with ease. In other words, the many modes and ease of the restraining of the ambitious. He is made contemptible by being held to be changeable, light, effeminate, pusillanimous, irresolute. And from these, the prince ought to guard himself as from a reef, the reef under the water, right? The reef, and to contrive that in his actions, one will recognize greatness, spirited gravity, and strength. So you need, again, go back to the 11 those things, right? Avoid what? If you're seen to be or are changeable, light, effeminate, pusillanimous, small-souled, irresolute, Hamlet's never be to be or not. Hamlet can't act. If you can't make a decision, you have to be resolute in that sense. Irresolute. This is dangerous because why? If the people and others see you as this, they don't respect you. They hold you in contempt. If they hold you in contempt, now, if you have power, they're not going. They might just hold you in contempt. But the second you're gone, people who, what do you do with the people you contempt? You just not only disrespect them, you'd get rid of them. You strike at them. People you have contempt for, you want to rip to pieces. If you have you want vengeance on them. You'd like if they did, particularly if they've done something against you. Once they're powerless, you will just go after them. You will humiliate them, and then therefore this is the whole point, right? That and therefore it is made contemptible. These things this is be disaster. It's like a reef. In other words, these are the reef that you don't necessarily see that. Reefs are underneath the water, right? They're underneath the water. There are things, and ships run aground because they don't see them. This is the therefore these kind of these traits, these in other words, changeableness, lightness, feminineness, pusillanimousness, resoluteness. These are like a wreath. You should what? A prince ought to guard himself as something that you have to be careful, like a wreath in the water, and contrive his actions. Contrive. His action needs to appear contrived. Always, his actions. You have to contrive your actions. So what? Contrive that in his actions, one will recognize, others will see greatness, spiritedness, gravity, and strength. Okay, this is the whole thing. Now continue. As for the private affairs of his subjects, he should will that his judgment be irrevocable, and see to it that he maintains such an opinion of his firmness, so that no one thinks of deceiving him or getting around him. So in other words, as for private affairs of his subjects, he should just make sure that the subjects only realize that he's going to be what? His judgments are irrevocable. In other words, and that he maintain and see to it that he maintains such an opinion of his firmness. In other words, people always understand he's not going to change his mind. He's not going to, willy belly not carry his in other words, irrevocable in his firmness, that no one thinks of deceiving him. In other words, the cost benefit of deceiving him is not worth it, because the likelihood of him being deceived is that he's not going to change. That you're going to deceive him to change his mind or something like this. It's going to be unlikely. Okay. Next paragraph. Second paragraph. The prince who maintains such an opinion about himself, in other words, maintaining the opinion, the appearance, people's beliefs. Opinions are beliefs. Beliefs are like opinions. What is opinion? Opinion is something that we have. We hold it. Opinions and beliefs are interconnected in this sense. So when we have an opinion about something, it's a belief about a thing. Okay. Now there's different levels of belief, right? And there's different levels, but we all start with opinions. In fact, this is the Socratic point. So knowledge begins with opinions. We have opinion first. We test the opinion against experience and truth, and then whether it survives that encounter, and it becomes knowledge, right? The thing after the process, after the opinions, experience, reason encounter with truth, either through reasoning or through experience, then it passes on to knowledge. Okay, and this is the thing about this. So therefore, he needs to be in other words, a prince. Such opinions about himself will be much reputed. Again, this is the first sentence. The prince who maintains such an opinion about himself will be much reputed, semicolon. And one conspires with great difficulty against the one who has such a reputation. Dash, he will be attacked with difficulty, comma, provided it is understood that he is an excellent man and is revered by his own. In other words, he's revered, he's loved. He's an excellent person. He's not contemptible. He's held to be great. He's revered. It's going to be very difficult to what? To conspire against those who are respected and honored and revered. It's going to be difficult. It's more easy when they're held in contempt or hated. You conspire. This is conspiracies are going to be difficult when someone is revered and are held with respect. Okay. Next sentence. For a prince ought to have two fears. One fear arises from within and concerns his subjects. The other arises from without and concerns external powers. So the prince always should have two fears, he says. One internal, one external. The first one is about subjects, and the second is about other powers. Let's continue. One defends oneself from the latter fear with good arms and good friends. And if one has good arms, one will always have good friends. And internal affairs, after good friends, semicolon, and in internal affairs, it will be stable if external affairs are stable, provided that the former, stable comma, provided that the former have not already been disturbed by conspiracy. Now he brings the conspiracy. So first thing he talks about is the former about the external, right? One defense against the former by having what? Good arms and good friends. Now remember, good arms, you go back all the way to chapter 12, the discussion of good arms and good, the good arms versus good laws. You need to have one and have the other. Now he does something here. He implies you need good arms and good friends. And he does something similar to this. He says, and if one has good arms, one will always have good friends. Now that's interesting. Remember what he said, but then again, remember carefully what he said about friends. The friends that you buy, you can't spend. Only those that you get through your greatness and your virtue will they be the ones you can spend. So therefore, the friends you have, and this means the friends of the international world. In other words, these friends are not the ones you're going to buy. These friends are there because they respect your power. They respect your power. Okay? They're going to come with you and they respect your power. They respect your greatness. They respect these things. And they're getting something from you, but you're not buying their loyalty. You're not buying their loyalty. Because if they buy your loyalty, those friends will disappear. Okay? So the external affairs, and if you have good arms, you always have good allies. So in other words, that's the whole point, right? This is the thing, that if you're weak, you're dependent upon them. But if you're strong, you have good arms, they're more likely to be either dependent upon you or not. But then see, you can take care of yourself, so therefore you're worth working with. Okay. So therefore, this is the thing about this. So therefore, and he makes a point about this, and it says what about this? He says, and as long as, and therefore for eternal affairs, as long as those external things are okay, right? If external in eternal affairs will be stable if external will be stable. He connects the stability of one with the stability. The inside stability will be dependent upon the outside stability. That's interesting. Unless, he says, provided the former had not been disturbed by conspiracy. He brings up conspiracy. Dun, 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 dun. And then he says, and even if internal affairs are in motion, if a prince has so ordered himself and has lived as I have said, and if he does not falter, he will always sustain every attack, as I said Nabis the Spartan did. Now, this is important to realize. Nabis, he talked about Nabis. This is that Nabis was mentioned all the way back in chapter 9, right? Nabis the Spartan was able to, he was so strong and respected that everyone attacked him, and he was able not to leave and go attack his enemies, right? So therefore, this is the case, that therefore you can withstand. If you've done all those things properly, then you're able to defend yourself, and you're not to fear this. Now we go to our third paragraph. That ends the example of Nabis, the remembering of Nabis, and the example of Nabis now deals with the next point. He goes, but concerning his subjects, if external affairs are not in motion, he has to fear that they may secretly conspire, and from this the prince secures himself sufficiently by avoiding becoming hated or despised, and in keeping the people satisfied with him, semicolon. all all of which is necessary for him to do, as has been said above at length. In other words, and he said, everything I've said before, I've taught you what to do. How to avoid, in other words, you need to be what? You need to sufficiently avoid becoming hated or despised, and keeping the people satisfied with them. Now, I've discussed this all before, he says. Now, remember, don't touch their goods and women. Keep the ambitious checked. Make sure the people side with the people. There were all the things he talked about earlier and what we read so far. If you do these things, you can deal with this. If you've not, then you're SOL. It's going to be very bad. Now let's continue. And one of the most potential remedies a prince has against conspiracies is not to be hated by the universality of mankind, because he who conspires always believes that the death of the prince will satisfy the people, semicolon. But if he instead believes that it will offend them, comma, he will not be able to pluck the courage to take such a part, comma, for the difficulties on the part of conspirators are infinite. This is the point. Conspiracies are a problem. In other words, the bigger. In other words, conspiracies fail because once they're discovered, it can usually crush them. Okay. The problem with, therefore, the size. Anytime you have a conspiracy, once the number of participants over, 2, the likelihood is that anyone who leaks the information. So the larger the network of those who conspiring grows, the more likely of this, exponentially grows the exposure of the conspiracy. And then once the exposure of the conspiracy happens too early, then the collapse of it. And his point is that if the person, in other words, conspirators work on the belief that if we just kill the prince, the people happy. But if the people aren't going to be happy, that's why in Shakespeare. This is why in Shakespeare, Antony's speech, everyone thought that the people would be happy, and the people, when Brutus, the conspirators kill Caesar, right? That's why the funeral orations, the 2 funeral orations. That's why Mark Antony's speech is such an example of a very powerful case. You can go find a link to a BBC. There was a short little Shakespeare clips. I forget the actor, but he played Captain Winters in Brandon Brothers. He plays Anthony. Yes, he does the Anthony thing, and it's one of the most that version. His version of it is very powerful. That gives you understanding of how through rhetoric you can move the people to remember, and that the people loved Caesar, and that once you've come, because they, in other words, they thought that the people didn't really love Caesar, that they'd forget about him, but Anthony was able to move them, and therefore that is why this is a very important lesson here, that they believe the mankind will be satisfied with the death. But then what happens is, if they respect him and love him and they miss him now, most conspirators won't have the courage to, he says, pluck the courage. They won't have the courage to take part in that sense. That's why conspirators are. This is why the difficulties on the part of the conspirators are infinite. Next sentence, and one sees by experience that there have been many conspiracies, comma, and few of them come to a good end, because conspirators cannot act alone, comma, and he can get companions only from those whom he believes are malcontents, comma, a semicolon, sorry, malcontents, comma, semicolon. In other words, you can't get supporters, people who are like the guy. You're going to only get people who are unhappy, malcontents, right? And then he says, remember, malcontents may be different reasons why. Maybe they're completely incompetent. Maybe the reason why they're malcontented is because the ruler is justly punishing them in that sense. So then, therefore, this is in other words, and then therefore semicolon. And upon your discovering your mind to one who is a malcontent, you immediately give him the matter whereby he may become content For by revealing the conspiracy, he can hope that every advantage may be his. In other words, the malcontents, right? Well, if you can set, you know who is malcontented, you have the means to make them not malcontented. You can reward them or do something to make them unhappy. And because of that, they have the means. The people who are malcontented now realize, well, these guys are conspiring about this, right? Maybe I can get the prince like me now. Okay, those think on that. This is what conspiracies don't work, because the conspirators rely on the malcontented, and the malcontented knows what. They can say, well, the prince maybe be able to help me here. If I tell the prince this thing that's threatening him, maybe he'll do me some good. Remember, that's how a lot of people think in that sense. And for revealing the conspiracy, he can hope that every advantage may be his, semicolon, such that seeing a certain gain on this side and seeing how dubious and full of danger is on the other, one needs to be a rare friend indeed, or else one must be wholly an obstinate enemy of the prince if he is to keep faith with you. In other words, the only people who will, the mere malcontented will they see there's a benefits. The cost is so high and the benefit of the conspiracy is low for them, and they can see the way that the prince can reward him by turning by turning the conspirators in. There's a big benefit from this, maybe, and the cost is very low, so why not, right? And so therefore that's the danger of this. So you can't rely on the malcontent. You have to rely on what? Two things. This one-line thing, this friend. You have to have a friend who really loves you. They love you. They love you. They really respect you. They agree with you. They're a true friend. And they will, and this is why one must be a rare friend indeed, or else must be an absolute enemy of the prince, the real enemies of the prince. Only a real friend and a real enemy of the prince will be faithful in the conspiracy. The mere malcontented won't. Now, next sentence, and this is going to be a long video because of this. This is why this is such a long chapter. And to reduce this to brief terms, I will say that on the part of conspirators, there is nothing but fear, jealousy, and the anticipation of punishment that terrifies him, semicolon. But on the part of a prince, there is the majesty of the principate, the laws, the protection of the friends and the state, in all which defend him, semicolon, such that joining popular goodwill to all these things, it is impossible that anyone be so bold as to conspire, period. Conspirators have all these things against them. What they have always in a state of, what he says, fear, jealousy, and anticipation of punishment. And these state always leads them terror, terrifies them, okay? But what is this? The prince has what? Has the majesty of the principate, the majesty of the office, so that the laws, the protection of his friends and the state, all of these things to defend him. And as long as popular goodwill is there, it's going to be impossible for anyone to be bold to conspire. It'll be, and where ordinary a conspirator must fear before the execution of his evil, in this case he must also fear what will follow from the excess, having the people for an enemy, and because of this, he cannot hope to find any refuge. Now, this is why that scene from Shakespeare's Julius Caesar, where Antony turns it, and it just throws apart the conspirators' hope that they can establish the republic, and it throws that they have to leave, they have to flee from Rome, fearing the people in that sense, because the people become their enemies. And that's the danger here. This is why it's useful to understand that. Next paragraph. This is our, if it's, I think, correct, 1, 2, 3, 4, the 5th paragraph here. One could give infinite examples of this matter, and I shall connect myself with only one, occurring from the memory of our fathers. Messer Annibale Bentigoni, Prince of Bologna and grandfather of the present Annibale, was killed by the Cincelli, who had conspired against him. and no one remained of his house except Messer Giovanni, who was in saddling clothes. Immediately after the homicide, the people rose up and killed all the Cincelli, period. That act proceeded from the popular goodwill which the house of Bentivoglio had in those times, semicolon. That such that, comma, no one of that house remaining in Bologna could rule the state with Annibale dead, and having an indication that there was in other words, and having an indication that there was in Florence one born of the Bentivoglio, who had until then been taken to be the sons of a blacksmith. The Bolognese came to him in Florence and gave him the government of their city. It was governed by him until Messer Giovanni became aged to govern. Now, this is Machiavelli gives a footnote here, 3. This is on page 121. He goes, Annibale Giovanni was killed in 1445, and Signor Viglione was presumed natural son of the cousin of Annibale Viglione, ruled until 1462, when Giovanni came of age. This is in the Florentine Histories, Book 6, I think it's chapters 9 and 10. In the account given of Florentine history, that what emerges is the cruelty, not cruelty, again, this is one of the problems of living abroad so long. You lose English. You start losing your vocabulary. That's why you have to always use your English and use your language. You use it or lose it, right? Even native-born people can lose their language in this sense. The cruelty, the credulity of people, their deep desire brought about a jealous factionalism to have, however slim a connection, to the blood to which they had been accustomed. Period. The Alvarez says. Machiavelli's remarks that Santelli was not only honored, but adored. In other words, the blood. Remember he said about back all the way back in the first chapter, the second chapter of the Prince, about hereditary principates. The blood. If it's where we love, the love is the blood. Even the mere incidents the people will want the blood is not returned. Therefore, even this bastard was loved because he represented the blood. And then once the baby was of age to govern himself, he was able to govern. So therefore, this is a fanaticism of the people that turns to this. Let's turn again to where we left off. So he says here, the act proceeded from popular goodwill, which the house of Bentivoglio had in those times, and such no one in that house remaining. I keep read that Blackson's son of who had until then been taken for the son of a blacksmith. Blah blah blah. We did this, and it says, and then was governed to stay until Messer Giovanni became of age. Now we turn to the next paragraph. I think this is 6. I conclude, therefore, that a prince ought to take little account of conspirators, when he has the goodwill of the people. But when they are his enemies and bear him hatred, he ought to fear everything and everyone. So if the people are your enemies, you better fear everyone and everything. Again, so wait a minute. Again, this is not a gangster book. People misunderstand this. This is not a book. Everyone thinks that this book is about, this is about a book about being the mafia boss. No. Machiavelli does not, it's not ends really justifies the means. Not any ends justify any means for Machiavelli. The end is the preserving of the state, which benefits the people. The state benefits the subjects. The state provides the security and well-being for the subjects. The subject's good is concerned. And the perpetuation and maintaining of this is a good benefit for those who participate in it. Now, that's very serious, even the subjects. So therefore, this end means that deliver and secures this end are in themselves. Any end that is necessary to deliver this must be done, because this good is worth doing. That's the end justify the mean thing from previous chapters. It's not any end justify any means. This end, this particular end, does this. And therefore, if the people are not on your side, you're gonna be living in fear, because every conspiracy will work against you. You have to worry about every conspiracy. Remember the prince. Two things: you have to worry about the fear of conspiracies of people and people conspiring against you, and that. But if you're good and a good ruler, it's going to be unlikely, and it's going to be very difficult. Even if it is likely, you have to watch out for those who are your enemies, and they're really your enemies. Why are they your enemies? The real enemies, okay, and the people you've harmed or something, and just keep your enemies clear. And this is the point he wants to make. And they're easy to deal with in that sense. And as long as they're the few and not the many, it's easier to deal with them, he says. Now, he continues here. If he's hated by everyone, if people hate him, he ought to feel everything and everyone. It's comma, a period. That's really. Next sentence. And well-ordered states and wise princes have, with all diligence, thought of not making the great desperate, and of satisfying the people and keeping them content. For this is one of the most important matters that belongs to the prince. In other words, well-ordered states and wise princes do with all diligence thought of not making the great desperate. In other words, the few great, don't make them desperate. Because out of desperation, they will turn, if they're desperate and have nothing to lose. When you have nothing to lose, you might as well go for broke. People with nothing to lose are dangerous because they will nothing to lose. You have to have the great. Just make sure they're not desperate. Make sure they have things that will enough. They're goods and they're things, and enough things that are able to keep them sat. In other words, that they're afraid to lose them. Okay. In other words, they would like to keep them, they like to enjoy them, and that therefore the risk of going against the prince would be too much for them. If they have nothing to lose, the risk is nothing, but their lives, and maybe their lives is unlivable with you in charge anymore. So they might be willing to sacrifice it in order to get rid of you. They hate you that much. Okay, so you have to make sure that don't make them desperate. Don't make the great desperate, and satisfy the people and keeping them content. Remember what is satisfy the people. Remember what the people want all the way back then. To be left alone. Don't touch their goods and don't touch their honor. Particularly, don't touch their, there's two things he mentions. Their property and their women, right? Don't touch them. And you keep them content, and what happens is that this is going to be the most important thing, the prince will matter. 7th paragraph. Among the kingdoms of our time, which are well ordered and governed, governed is of France, and it is to be found in infinite good institutions upon which liberty and security of the king. In other words, he's saying the France example, which are the liberty and security of the king. Second, and the first of these is the parliament and its authority, for he who ordered that kingdom, knowing the ambitions of the powerful and their insolent, and judging it necessary for them to have a bit in their mouth to correct them. And on the other hand, knowing the hatred which is founded on fear by the universality, of men for the great, and wishing to reassure them, he did not want that this should be a particular concern of the king, that this should be a particular concern of the king, and he sought to remove from himself any blame which would receive from the great if he favored the people, or the people if he favored the great, and therefore he contrived a third judge who would keep down the great and favor the small without placing any burden on the king. So in other words, the king wouldn't have to do it. He created a third power, and that third power would be kind of the parliaments, who would check the great and the people and the great. If he does one, he's going to alienate the other, right? So therefore, he has to, and these two always will be at, trying to do, this one's going to try to do this one resents this one. If he does things to help this, these will get resentful. If he does something to help this, he does. So how does he to do this? He creates a third power, and the third power prevents these from harming these. The parliaments, right? The parliaments are not the parliament as we understand. The parliaments are more courts in the sense. And it doesn't place any burden on the king. They're not really the kings. In other words, it's the court has decided, not me. It's not me. I created it, yeah, but it's not me doing it. So, like the example of Marco di Orco, right? He let someone else to do the dirty work. Nor could there be anything better than this ordinance. This is the next sentence. Nor more prudent, comma. Nor was there a greater cause of security of the king and his kingdom. Period. See, by doing what he did with the balance and creating a third party to do these things. Again, this is why that reference to what the first thing after establishing, Cesare Borgia. Remember? They go back to the Cesare Borgia example. What does he do once he uses Marco di Orco to end the factional conflict? He establishes that in every place there was a court, right, and a good and honorable administrative court, and the court worked, and it was respectable present in every place, right, and then therefore then the second thing is you moved the Yorker, right, in a way that everyone was satisfied and stupefied. Well, this is the same thing. The French king kind of didn't do it the same bloody way that, in many ways, the example of the French government, the French state, French monarchy, and what Borgia tried to do are kind of similar in that sense. And this is no better ordinance, more prudent, nor was any greater cause of security of the king and his kingdom. Next sentence. Whence one may draw something else which is noteworthy, that princes ought to let burdensome things be administered by others, and keep for themselves those which are of grace and favor. Burdensome things, let others do. Again, Diorca, go let Diorca kill everyone and introduce everything. Let the burdensome and the things that can get you hated, let others do. You do what? Those, and let you keep for yourself, the prince, the ruler, those which give you what? He says here, minister by others, and keep for themselves those which give you grace and favor. In other words, make you loved, make you respected. In other words, do things that give you your greatness, and then do things that benefit people in that sense. Anew, I conclude that a prince ought to esteem the great, but not make himself hated by the people. In other words, a prince ought to esteem the great, but not make himself hated by the people. So therefore, important, hated by the people. Don't get it. But you need to make this grace kind of feel that they're valued, or you think that you present that they're valued, that you don't make them feel that they're desperate or they're things like that. Remember, next paragraph. It might perhaps appear to many, considering the life and death of some Roman emperors, that there might be an example contrary to my opinion, and they will find someone who had lived excellently and shown great virtue of mind, and who nevertheless lost their imperium, or even murdered by his own who conspired against him. Period. Wishing therefore to respond to these objections, I shall discuss the qualities of some emperors, showing the causes of their ruin, which are not difficult from those which have been adduced by me. Semicolon. In part, I will put in consideration of those things which are notable for him who reads the actions of those times, and that is basically Tacitus. He's gonna now turn to Tacitus's. I think it's Annals, if I'm correct. I'm trying to remember what is it the Annals or is it the History? Because there's two things, and it's always kind of. think it is the end. It is. It's the end. I think it is the annuals. I'll clarify this. And actually, this is a good place to take a break. This because we're at 50 minutes, and I don't want to make this too long. So we'll take part 2. This is part 1 of this chapter, and we will spend the next video on finishing this chapter because this is a big chapter. Okay. Again, if you like this video, like it. If you pass it on to your friend, if you want to do something like that, great. If you have any questions or comment, put it below in the corner. Follow me on social media. There's a copy link to the about the Alvarez translation by the publisher. Again, which is I'm using the Alvarez translation in my readings here. Please, again, see you next time, and we finish this up. Okay, bye bye.